Dear audience, a warm welcome to the Aalto Research Data Uncovered event brought to you by Research Services. I'm Antti Rose and I'll be your host today. The Research Services and Aalto Research Data Management Network arrange and partook in almost 20 different trainings and workshops this spring. And for this last event, for spring 2023, we'll turn the tables a bit. We'll now put the spotlight on other researchers and their open perspectives on open data and open science. Aalto Research Data Uncovered event is the first of its kind. We started by making an open call for short videos that feature Aalto researchers and their perspectives on open data. We had a lot of applicants, a lot of really good applicants, and after the selection for the winners were done, our small but brilliant production team of the research services, they recorded and edited the videos to be showcased for you here today. And we have two wonderful researchers from Aalto here today, and the first video that we're going to watch that will follow up by a presentation is from the research of Dr. Kamyar Hasanzadeh. And we'll look at the video and then we'll hear Kamyar's presentation.
As urban dwellers, we experience our cities differently. We want different things from our everyday environment. So what we do in our research is to study what people actually want from their living environments and how does the urban environment affect people's everyday life. The kind of data we work with comes from a very specific kind of survey. So it's a combination of traditional questionnaires with a mapping component, so people answer different kinds of questions in the survey, and also they have the possibility to mark something on the map and express their opinions, their experiences regarding different kinds of locations. Very often we ask them about their mobility, places they visit on a regular basis, and using this information we try to answer different kinds of research questions. So we deal with a lot of personal information in our data. For a long time we had the interest in making our data sets more open. One of the main reasons was that we do a rather big investment when we are collecting data in terms of money and also human resources. We wanted to make it more usable. So we have collected this data. If there are other researchers who are interested in using this data for their research purposes, they should be able to do that. Also for educational purposes, we use this kind of data in our teaching. There are also many ethical reasons why we should open our data, share our data sets, for example, for the sake of transparency and the reproducibility of our research results. But of course, when we have personal information and we haven't anonymized the data, we cannot just share it with other people. So it was important for us to come up with a robust way of anonymizing the data. The approach we used is basically adding noise to the data. For geographic data, that would basically mean that we add noise to the coordinates, which means that a point will be relocated to another location. The main question is that where would the point be moved to? How big should this displacement be? And that's the question we were trying to find an answer for in our project. One of the things that we took into account when developing an algorithm for anonymizing data was to make it context specific. One of the pieces of information that we often have in our data set is the living location of individuals, and that's obviously very personal information. So, for example, depending on what area in the city the person lives in, how densely populated it is, there is different need for amount of noise we need to add to the location. So we took that into account, and in order to make sure that we have done a good enough job of anonymizing the data, we developed a way of assessing the robustness of anonymization for the geographical data. So before publishing anything, we ran the data through different tests to make sure that it passes them all and the data is good to be published openly. As researchers, it's very important for us to have access to as much data as possible. We cannot just reinvent the wheel all the time, collect the data that might already exist. So hopefully we will see in coming years more and more data being openly available. So this would help a lot. This would help researchers a lot in their work.
Hi everyone. My name is Kamyar Hasanzadeh. I'm a postdoc researcher from Department of Built Environment in Aalto University, and I'm happy to be here today talking to you about a project which we completed about 2 years ago, and it's about anonymizing participatory mapping data. But before I continue, I want to acknowledge some of my colleagues who collaborated, who participated in this project. So before I get it started, you might be asking already, why should we think about that? Why did we start to think about this in the first place? Why is it important to open our data? It is good for you. That's the first reason. There are many practical reasons why we should consider opening our data sets. For example, nowadays it's required by a growing list of funders. Also, many journals nowadays require us to provide data together with our manuscripts, and also depending on which platform you use for data publishing, you have the possibility of getting acknowledged for the work you have done collecting the data. In addition to practical reasons, there are also ethical reasons why we should consider publishing our datasets openly. It's good for the community. As researchers, it's important to be as transparent as possible, and also make it possible for our research results to be reproducible. So there's a long list of reasons why we wanted to publish our data in the first place. So our mission was simple, or at least it seemed simple. It was to publish participatory mapping data, or to be more specific, PPGIS, and I will explain shortly what I mean by PPGIS. So PPGIS, it is short for Public Participation Geographic Information System. So the term might sound fancy, but the concept is quite simple. So it's a very specific kind of questionnaire. It's a combination of a traditional questionnaire where we ask participants about questions about different things about themselves, and also different things about the research topic that we are working on. But the novelty of this kind of questionnaire is that we also have a mapping component. So the participant is asked to make markings on a map. This marking is usually point, but it can be different kinds of geographic features, for example, line or polygons. And once they make the marking on a map, they have the possibility of providing additional information about the location. So, for example, we very often ask people how they visit that location, what is the mode of transport, and many different things. So at the end, the data would look like this. So this is an example of point data. And as you can see, we have the coordinates from each marking, and also we have other attributes attached to the places and attached to the individuals. So this is basically what the data looks like. So we have different kinds of information depending on the kind of project we are working on. We collect different kind of information from individuals. Some of this information is personal. For example, very often in our research, we ask people to mark their home locations, and obviously that's a very personal piece of information. So we knew that in order to be able to publish our data sets openly, we need to find a way of anonymizing our data sets. And this approach that we need, it should be robust. Very soon I get back to this, what I mean by robust, and it should be efficient. And by efficient, I mean two things, basically. First, it should do a good job of anonymizing data, but at the same time preserve as much of the quality of data as possible, because by publishing the data, we want to make the data available to others for further research, for further work. So we want to preserve as much of the quality as possible. Another thing I mean by efficient here is that well, this was a project we worked on for a while, but we wanted this to happen on a rolling basis. So whenever we collect new data sets for our projects, the next person who is working in the team should be able to run the algorithm and anonymize the data and publish it eventually. But what do we mean by robustness? Of course, we are doing our research in Europe, so we had to consult with GDPR for as the legal guideline for our work. According to GDPR, we are not allowed to publish any personal information unless we do a good job of anonymizing the data. So it's not enough to do just a pseudo-anonymization in which we remove the direct identifiers for individuals. So we have to make sure that the data is properly anonymized. And according to GDPR, we have to make sure that individuals cannot be singled out after anonymization. So basically, they cannot be identified. We should also make sure the data is not linkable, meaning that even if you have removed a piece of personal information, you have to make sure that other existing information in the data cannot be used to guess what kind of information you have removed from your data. You have to also take a next step. You should take another step and make sure that inference cannot be used to guess what kind of information you have removed during the anonymization. And people who want to hack into your data and undo the anonymization might use different algorithms, different machine learning methods, regression, different kinds of methods using your data and other data to undo what you have done during your anonymization. So this is the overview of the journey we took during this project. We started by data management. We very soon understood that it's very important to be very systematic with how we store our data. You know, research environments are very dynamic, so researchers come and go. So people have different styles of storing things and documenting data sets. So we came up with a standard way of data management, so it has detailed information about how the data should be stored and how we should generate metadata and produce different kinds of documentation for the data we collect. Also, we had to do data scrutiny at the beginning of our work because we have different kinds of information, so we have to identify which pieces of information are personal, and personal information comes in different levels, so not all of them should be treated equally. And once we scrutinize our data enough and we know the anonymization needs, we do the data anonymization based on the needs, and then it's important to do some kind of assessment and evaluation of our work, assessing how well we have performed in anonymizing the data and evaluating how good the quality of the data is after doing the anonymization. And if everything is okay, then we can proceed with publishing our data at the end. Of course, before starting our work, we wanted to do a proper literature review to see what kind of solutions already exist related to data anonymization. There isn't so much work, and with geographic data, the amount of literature is even smaller, but generally speaking, there are three categories of data anonymization methods. The first group is generalization. So you basically aggregate individual or data about individuals into bigger groups. So for example, you make sure that the person cannot be singled out, but if someone tries to identify the person, they would come to K number of individuals, not that person, not that single person, and that K should be big enough. Then the second approach is randomization, is basically adding noise to your data. And then we have a third group of approaches called obfuscation, which basically means you replace the true information in your data with something that is similar in characteristics of your original data, but it's not the same. For geographic data, for example, you would move a person's home location to the nearest intersection or center of town or something like that. So as I said, we have different kinds of data, different kinds of information in our data, and we had to treat them differently. We have some non-spatial attributes in our data. For these, if the information was not very vital to the data set, and also it had a lot of sensitive information, we basically removed those sensitive data before publishing. For some other attributes, we use generalization. For example, we had age of individuals, so we knew in many of our projects, in many of our data sets, we knew in which year they were born, so this was too specific. So what we did, we used the categories used in Statistics Finland to generalize. So instead of saying in which year the person is born, we just have this broad 10-year age groups, for example. For spatial data, for geographic data, for the data sets that are not very sensitive, for example, if we know where people go to do different kinds of activities or where they go shopping, this is not so personal compared to home location of an individual. For this kind of information, we used a simple so-called donut displacement. So we made sure the points are displaced randomly for at least certain distance, and we also specified a maximum amount. But for information that was more personal, particularly in our case, it was the home location of individuals, we adopted something similar to the donut approach, but a bit more complicated. We used a bimodal Gaussian displacement, so we used this normal curve to produce that noise that we added to the locations, to the coordinates, and so we know the normal characteristics of normal curves, so ideally we have produced as little noise as possible to preserve the quality of data. But to make sure that the anonymization is good enough, the displacement is enough, we made the approach context specific. So depending, for example, depending on the amount of population in each area, we know how much displacement is required. If someone is living somewhere in outer suburban areas where the population is very scarce, there's a bigger need for anonymization, but in very dense areas in center, for example, there's less need. So this is taken into account during the anonymization process. We also needed a way of assessing how well the anonymization has worked, and we adopted the concept of k-anonymity, as I mentioned earlier. So the idea is here is that we make sure that the person cannot be singled out. At least there would be a k number of individuals with the same characteristics. So what we did to measure this was basically translating this normal curve that we had used for anonymization, for generating the noise, and translate it into these circles. So, and then we used the information on population density and the area of the circles to estimate the k-anonymity for the data for that individual. So another thing we had to do was evaluating that the data quality is good enough, and for that we published a paper in which we tested in different ways how the quality of data has changed and whether we can observe the same patterns after anonymization in our data set. So what are the project outputs? The first output is the anonymized data. We created a community for our team on Zenodo, and we published some of our data sets there, and we are hoping to continue this process. We have a publication based on our work where we have described the algorithm and also how the evaluation and the results of the evaluation of the quality of data after anonymization. For internal use, we produced data handling a standard or protocol to make our processes of data management more systematic. And as a more of a hobby project, as an educational tool, we also developed this WebGIS tool, which is basically is the same algorithm implemented as a web tool for educational purposes. So you can just upload your data and see how the anonymization works. So here's the summary and a few tips for people who are interested in publishing their data. One thing I would like to mention here is that although I talked about a very specific kind of geographic data, PPGIS, many of the ideas I presented today are general to geographic data. So some of these can be used for other types of GIS data or geographic data. So if you ask me, can we anonymize geographic data and particularly PPGIS data? My answer is yes. If you use a proper way, if you use a good enough approach, you can anonymize many types of geographic data sets, including PPGIS. Data anonymization usually comes with the price of losing some quality in your data, but as we also discussed in our paper, if you know how the data has been treated and anonymized, you can take certain measures to minimize the effects of anonymization. So the data is still usable for many research purposes. So one last tip for you if you're interested in doing this, and that is plan in advance. There are many steps that you need to take in advance, like how you store your data, and also if you're collecting data from people, it's important to write the correct type of consent form so you will not have problem later when you're trying to publish your data. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kamyar. I'm so happy that you're willing to share what you learned with the Aalto community. I believe that it is the essence of open science that we learn together. So the next researcher we can all learn from comes from the School of Arts and Design and Architecture. Her name is Marika Tervahartiala, and we'll again see Marika's videos next, and then we'll hear her presentation.
Piirtäminen mun tutkimuksessa on sekä tietämisen tapa, menetelmä ja metodologia. Se on yhtä aikaa se tutkimisen prosessi, mutta myös sen lopputulos ja paikoin jopa tiedon visualisointia. Mun väitöstutkimuksessa tietää myös toinen kanssatutkija, tämmöinen abstrakti olento, entiteetti, piirros. Eli piirtäminen ei ole pelkästään menetelmä, vaan se on myös toinen omatahtoinen tietäjä. Mun fyysinen tutkimusaineisto käsittää yhteensä varmaan yli 20 muistikirjaa tai tämmöistä luonnoskirjaa. Ja näistä luonnoskirjoista on digitoitu pelkästään ne piirrokset sieltä kirjoista. Ja aineiston digitointi on aloitettu siitä, että ne on tosiaan reprovalokuvattu. Ja sen jälkeen valokuvat on viety sitten kuvankäsittelyohjelmaan. Siellä niistä on poistettu roskat, sutut, kaikki turhat asiat. Ja sen jälkeen ne on tallennettu useissa eri muodoissa, esimerkiksi JPG- ja PNG-versiot. Tästä laadittiin semmoinen skripti, joka ikään kuin toimii meidän ohjeena jatkossakin, että jos aineistoa digitoidaan lisää, niin että tehdään se aina samalla tavalla. Kun piirroskuvat on digitoitu, niin me ollaan menetetty tavallaan se, että piirros on osa sitä kokonaista kirjaa tai että se on osa koko sivua, jossa on voinut olla vaikka tekstejä mukana. Se on tavallaan kadonnut siitä kirjan kontekstista, mutta piirros on myös saanut paljon asioita. Eli digitoinnin myötä piirroksesta on tullut skaalattava, siitä on tullut monistettava ja jaettava erilaisissa medioissa erilaisille yleisölle. Ja toisaalta sitä koko aineistoa, jopa niitä 1400 kuvaa voi tarkastella yhtenä isona massana, mikä on kauhean hauskaa. Mun tavoitteena on avata tämä aineisto tosi laajalle yleisölle. Ja piirroskuva tarvitsee semmoisen ympäristön itselleen, jossa se saa toimia omilla ehdoillaan. Mä haluaisin luoda semmoisen virtuaalisen ja vuorovaikutteisen, kokemuksellisen ja jopa hauskan galleriaympäristön, jota katsoja kokija voi käyttää ja missä piirros voi olla vuorovaikutuksessa sitten näiden erilaisten yleisöjen kanssa. Nyt kun mun tavoitteena on avata tämä tutkimusaineisto laajemmille yleisölle, niin sehän on tutkijasta hirvittävän jännittävää ja toisaalta innostavaa. Mä olen vähän huolissani piirroksen puolesta, että mitä sille tapahtuu, kun mä vapautan sen maailmaa, mutta toisaalta mun velvollisuus, tämmöinen tutkimuseettinen velvollisuus on päästää tämä aineisto vapaaksi ja vuorovaikutukseen. Piirroksen ei kuulu olla vankina luonnoskirjassa, vaan sen kuuluu päästä irti.
Okay, dear audience, as you can see, drawing now seems quite happy after setting free from these sketchbooks mentioned in the video. And here we are on the Aalto University's hybrid stage presenting together. I'm quite nervous, but drawing has already these fireworks and sparkling wine inviting you, the dear audience here at Aalto and also there online, to join drawing. And what about me, the human researcher? Well, I'm Marika Tervahartiala, a brand new Doctor of Arts from this Aalto University from the Department of Art and Media. And in my research, for me, drawing is researching. it, she, he, the pronoun is still under discussion, is a research method and even a methodology. Drawings are also research material and data, and this visual and artistic material has agency, material agency beyond humans. Drawing gives visible shapes for thoughts, feelings, and ideas. It twists and transforms thinking, researching processes and outcomes. Drawing has artistic knowledge and will of its own. Besides doctoral studies, I have been acting broadly in the field of art education. As a visual artist, I have been practicing these artistic collaborations, such as communal art project during the pandemic. The aim of the project, Koronan kohottamat, was to provide a wide variety of arts to the public in these desperate times of corona pandemic via short YouTube videos, and also to offer new ways of collaboration for artists around Finland during this lockdown situation. I have been working with several cultural institutions and, for example, created a pedagogical concept for a public art event for all the second graders in Helsinki area. This was part of cooperation with Helsinki City, Music Hall, Contemporary Art Museum Kiasma and Helsinki Festival Week. Nearly 3,000 pupils participated this very colorful event, and it was so rewarding to see all these pupils on this, I don't know what is this park called in the middle of the Helsinki. As a part of my expertise, I have always been doing these kind of very meaningful pro bono projects. Here's one example of a project with the Federation of Mother and Child Homes and Shelters. They are offering help for drug-addicted mothers, and I was a facilitating drawer in their video material shared online. And on the other hand, I'm still a practicing art educator in the what is lukio now? Now I'm losing the word. in school, and also doing a postdoc research. I have a grant for 10 months, so I'm kind of combining these kind of professional sides. And here is the actual book, the thesis, and it has this fancy covering box, and there's the book itself. It includes 4 peer-reviewed articles. 2 of them are Finnish and two in English. And this artifact is actually one of my research outcomes. Here drawing and the drawings are not dominated by the words, which usually is the case in research publications. This book format makes it possible to read more than 400 research drawings. They are on the kind of left-hand side, separately from the research text, which is on the right-hand side. The research text and drawing, the words and the drawn pictures act together in an equal dialogue. The reader has an active and participatory role in the process. This thesis can be found as a free and quite dull, boring PDF version from the Aalto Art Books web pages. So I will not even try to summarize the content of the research, but instead my aim is try to arouse curiosity towards this research theme, drawing. We humans, we are eager to find solutions, any solutions, fix solutions, the very best solutions. But solutions simplify a complicated world. By building structures to solve problems, we are easily losing these overlapping, surprising and emerging possibilities and creativity. Drawing is an invitation to stay with unknowing and not knowing. Drawing is an invitation to stay with the trouble. This stay with the trouble comes from Donna Haraway, 2016. Staying with the trouble might turn out to be a very sweet, fruitful and joyful process. Me and drawing, we are listening. We are offering our artistic processing of and with the world, challenging us all to think and feel outside the box. So far, I have learned that what works might hurt, and on the other hand side, what hurts might work. I have also learned that friction and resistance are often a sign of ongoing and meaningful change, and they should be praised. Me as a drawer, I'm not a solitude Indiana Jones conquering unknown regions all by myself. This is teamwork. It's all about me and drawing coming together, and it is drawing that brings along artistic knowledge beyond human understanding. The process of drawing, as listening and researching, is complicated. It is really messy and entangled. After finalizing this thesis, Drawing and me, we are more than willing to jump into something new, yet unknown depths and areas of operation, even though jumping into unknown is always scary for everyone. Maybe somebody knows how does it feel up there. Drawing demands and offers a leap of faith to unknowing and to uncertainty. Drawing offers a possibility to let go of our previous knowledge and assumptions. Within drawing, something else, something more can be found. Something that is more than human, something that is other than human, something beyond our current knowledge. We have to let go and trust the artistic, creative process. Drawing and me, we are aiming to achieve with our audiences. We are not alone. There's also other people and other things happening around us. A curious and joyful state of mind, sustainable and creative growth, and deepened understanding. At the moment, we are exploring what else could be done with this kind of material, this kind of method and way of knowing. First of all, we are seeking participatory research publishing that could inspire people about drawing. Such ways to publish artistic research that are playful and accessible and shares activity and active agency with audiences. One of our articles is in publication process, and to my knowledge, it will be the very first peer-reviewed research article in a form of card deck. So it's really like a kind of thing that you can play with. At the moment, we are also participating in this UniArts Helsinki pre-incubator program in the creative and/or art industries. This kind of research material that I'm talking about and the drawing concept also needs some protection. Therefore, I have made an application to register a trademark. I have brought some domains, and in general, I have to make sure that drawings' immaterial rights are safe. UniArts pre-incubator program leads us to be present in several business-related occasions, such as this upcoming creative demo day in Music Hall. It will be on the 25th of May, so you are most welcome to join us there. I'm also seeking possibilities to exhibit these drawings that you have seen here, and on those other more than 2,000 altogether, I think, at the moment, in the context of visual arts and art education. Therefore, I have made a proposition of my drawings as a gallery exhibition for the Annantalo Art Center for Children and Young People. Drawing is eager and willing to participate, to inspire and to speak up. It wants to meet and interact with different audiences and to cooperate on various fields from science to arts. With drawing, we have applied to this creativity and research exhibition in the Science Center Heureka in Vantaa. And if we will be accepted, drawing will be performed in Aalto University's and Heureka's joint exhibition in the autumn 2024. As a human researcher, my obligation is to make sure that drawing has multiple possibilities to get in contact with audiences of many kinds. I may only have a slight idea what might become of these coming together, these interactions and participatory dialogues. But for sure, drawing will reveal its full potential when it's kind of left free to the world. And I look forward to hear from any ideas considering any cooperation and possibilities for drawing to get wild. And it was my pleasure to be here in this warm and creative atmosphere today. I have been very nervous, but thank you for all being here and creating this beautiful place to be presenting something like this. On behalf of myself and drawing, I thank you for your participation and attention.
Okay, and now we will follow with a Q&A segment. And, oh, we got chairs.
Oi.
Yes. Great. So happy that you just, both of you just shared something like, I feel like having done a PhD myself, it's almost intimate what you share. The expertise of doing research and how you view about it. So let's start the Q&A, and maybe Marika can go first, like this classic question. So how do you feel now?
Oh, this was such a kind of pleasure to be here. It's a privilege that somebody has seen and kind of understood my research and this wonderful video that somehow concludes the whole process with this kind of special data. It was my real pleasure.
Yeah, so I'm very excited about this topic. I know that talking about data may not always be so exciting for many people, but I think it's an important thing to think about. So whenever I get the opportunity to talk about it and promote openness and open data in science, I'm very excited about it.
Great. Maybe we can open the floor for the audience can also ask questions if you like, but so to give you some time to think of your questions, I'll maybe ask another one. So the research project is often quite long and takes time and years to kind of finish. So if you thinking about the person that started the research back then, would you have any advice for that person, or would you do something differently? Maybe we can do Kamyar first this time. Like, would you have any advice for the person that once started the project?
Well, one important thing, like as I also said in my presentation, was that like we could have been more prepared at the beginning. For example, at first we thought we were so much focused on the publishing part of our data that originally we hadn't thought so much about anonymization, which at the end became even the more important part of the process. So yeah, so we would have like done more research in advance. But anyway, we recognized the need for proper anonymization early on during the process, so we could do proper work on it.
Yeah, it has been long since I started this research, but a piece of advice for younger me. Well, I think you mentioned the planning beforehand, like how to handle the data. It's really important. So, kind of to put the dates correct. Even though I have been drawing in sketchbooks, but they are really concrete books. How to kind of store them and when to make these digitalizations of the pictures. It was actually my luck that I did it in the very last stage, because there has been so many technical innovations in between that it was a good coincidence that I was able to do it in the very last phase. So because of all these databases can change and so on, so you have to take care of that the data is still transferable when the years pass by, and it might take as long as 10 years. So what happens in this kind of long period?
Thank you. There's a question from the audience, yes?
Thank you. This is for Kamyar, and this is a rather technical question. I apologize. So I used to be a data scientist myself, so my approach is rather technical. So the question is, when you add the noise into the locations, do you take into account the natural obstacles such as the sea and the land, so that for example, the living location of somebody would not end up in the sea, or is it just pure Gaussian noise that you add there?
Yeah, we took into account somewhat, like if for example, large bodies of water. Yeah, if it happens to go there, we checked for it and we did corrections, but not entirely, because the data is generated by people, so there are usually a lot of inaccuracies in where people mark things, so it's not so unusual to have a marking in a forest or in a green area. So, yeah.
So related to what you just told us, like from given that we work in the research services, is there a type of support that you maybe now looking back would have needed, appreciated, or can you pinpoint to us into any kind of direction that would be beneficial from your point of view?
Yeah, maybe I can start with this. Yeah. As I also mentioned in my presentation, one of the problems we had at the beginning was that we were not so systematic with how we manage our data. As I said, there are like different generations of researchers working in the group, and they store files differently, they name things differently. So for our own internal use, we drafted this kind of what we call protocol to do things a bit more harmoniously. But I think that's an area that we can receive support so that everyone knows how to store data, how to manage data, and also for different kinds of data. So that would be very helpful.
And I think also that it's really important to kind of raise awareness of these kind of things, like opening the data. And also the funders are like a remarkable part of this thing, that unless you have some money to kind of make these things happen, to open up the data and to kind of make it anonymous or something like that, that also needs funding and resources, human resources and other kind of resources. So I think this is a very important opening for also this kind of discussion, that who is responsible for doing all these things.
Would there be any questions? There's a question from this.
A question for Marika about, you mentioned opening the data that you've been working with, which are almost 2,000 images. What kind of metadata or descriptors would you mentioned that you maybe want to add something or to make that when you're opening it? What additional information or tags would be used when working with imagery?
Yeah, I would love to. This was an excellent question. I would love to add many these kind of metadata things like dates and events where I have been drawing, like I have been drawing in schools and conferences and on my holidays, and some of them are research related and some of them are not. But I would hope also the public to be able to use this data and add their own metadata to it, so that maybe some picture is related in my head to my summer holiday, but somebody else sees there something totally else. And I find it highly interesting to have this kind of open data concept, that anybody could add their own kind of things to it and see how it evolves after that.
Public sourced metadata, so people could add significance and text to your keyword.
Yep, that would be lovely.
So, like, what in terms of benefits? Like, I think this has been somewhat addressed, but regarding your perspectives on open data, do you kind of, and Kamyar mentioned these in the presentation as well, but could you still elaborate the benefits on how would you kind of get other researchers interested or motivate others to share their data? Would you shortly elaborate still on why do you think that's important? What's the benefit for them to do something that you've done here?
Yeah, I guess the ethical reasons and what is good for the community are kind of obvious, but what I've found most motivating for individuals, for researchers as individuals, is to emphasize on those more personal, practical reasons why they should think about this, because data anonymization is time consuming, it's a tedious task, so they should have some motivation. Very often when I talk about the fact that they can get acknowledged for their work, because sometimes researchers, in our kind of data, spend half a year collecting data. If they know they can get acknowledged for that work, for example, where you publish on Zenodo platform, you can get cited for your data. So these are some of the things that motivate researchers a lot. So there should be more emphasis on benefits.
Yeah, and I think that, as I said, this drawing, this abstract entity, it wants to be alive, it wants to be in contact. So I think it's I don't want to abandon it into this sketchbook or notebooks or in some archive that nobody looks at, but I want it to be alive and to be kind of free to go wherever she or it, or I don't know what is the pronoun still, wherever it wants to go, because it has been also surprising how useful this drawing method and its existence can be in various fields. I have been very surprised that the health sector, for example, has been asking about this data, how could they use these pictures, and kind of my expertise too.
So would there be any, now it's a great time to ask. Yep.
Do you have any concerns about opening your data when it goes out in the big wide world?
Well, I can maybe start. Of course, there are legal concerns on one thing, and most of us researchers are not lawyers or experts in law, so I advise whoever is interested in this to seek proper advice from legal consultants and professionals in the field. So that's one of the areas that you are a bit uncomfortable with. That's one of the things. The other concern maybe I can add related to what you said earlier is that this is something that we want to happen on a rolling basis, but there should be some kind of support to motivate researchers. After we are done with this project, this thing continues. Not that this is something we tried and we are done with it.
Yeah. I think it's really scary to release the drawing because it's somehow part of me and my being and my identity, and now I can see it running away from me, and what happens after that? Maybe we are going to have some linen that has these pictures of drawing in it, and or something else. Does it end up being part of some advertisement campaign or something? So I'm really scared, but on the other hand, I'm like some kind of a mother seeing the grown-up child running away from home and building up a life of its own. So I think that is something nice also to see what kind of things it invents on its own.
Thank you. Do you think we should, from your perspective, should we, and regarding your training as researchers, should there be more emphasis on data management and open science related issues, or is it fine as is, or would you have hope for more, and would you elaborate on the training perspective?
Definitely we should have more kind of education about this thing, and also this kind of the timeline is so long that to kind of understand that what happens after the research, and it is like a lifelong process to somehow take care of the data and how to do it. So I think it's really important, and also the universities have the responsibility of this public engagement. So also opening up the data is the way to make some kind of impact on society, that you are sharing the data and so you are sharing the results. So that is really important in future, even more than now.
Yeah, I think this open attitude toward data and science is a cultural thing, so it should be built up already from the time that we are studying. That's one thing that should be reflected in our teaching. Maybe the other thing is that maybe it's important for our students to already at the early stage during their education or career learn about GDPR and like legal issues related to privacy. Because very often, like in our courses, students get data, they do GIS analysis, they do different kinds of things with the data, so they should already think about this, learn to think about these things.
Yep.
Very good. And there's a question.
I have a question for Kamyar. So I think it's very valuable that you opened up not only your data, but you also published the method that you used to kind of balance anonymization with keeping the quality of the data. And I wanted to ask if you are aware of any cases where someone has reused your method, or if you've had any interesting feedback, for example, at conferences.
The topic has raised a lot of interest, like in conferences where I've presented, there's clearly a lot of interest. And actually this is one of the things maybe I should have mentioned related to how it can benefit the researcher. This work has led to a lot of collaborations and discussions with researchers from around the world. I've been approached by researchers in other countries, other institutions. So there is a lot of interest. I know the data has at least been used for educational purposes in courses. The anonymized data about research, I don't know. I'm not aware of it. At least I haven't been cited for it. But for education, at least, yes.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, I'm starting. How would is there any? Like you mentioned briefly your plans for the future, and that they were very kind of interesting. How do you, to some of them, the perspective of open data was well integrated, but can you still kind of maybe elaborate that how will you view or treat open data in the future, and will it be part of your thinking and your research and your work?
I think my kind of vision is to combine my artistic work and this art educational aspect and the research data somehow, that they are overlapping and kind of they are not separate from each other. They can be used in kind of separate purposes, even though it's the same amount of pictures and it is kind of it's data as a mass, but it can be like stretched out to different directions in a way. And now it's time to test out what kind of things could be done with all these kind of this data, where it could go and what could be done with it. So after the dissertation, I'm free to test out. I'm not any more like strict to the kind of the degree. So I think I have a lot of freedom to make any tryouts with this subject.
Yeah, in my work, I've been trying to be committed to what I've been preaching about, like related to open data. So whenever I collect new data and I do my work with it, I'm committed to like publishing the data. That's one thing. The other thing is that I hope to continue working on this topic. Like sometimes because of like limited time, we have taken like shortcuts. For example, if we didn't know how to anonymize a piece of information, we have removed that information from the data. I think we can develop the algorithm to make it even smarter to preserve more of the data quality. So there is need for more research.
Very cool, very cool. Any further questions? There's a question.
I would like to hear about your open data dreams. What would have at Aalto University as Aalto Research Data, open data in 5 years' time? For example, starting for your data.
Yeah, I can. Well, I would like to see this be like more promoted and be like clear guidelines how this should be done. Because, for example, I know even in Aalto University there are people who are not familiar with the kind of work we have done, and I know the need exists. So somehow promoting this a bit more efficiently. Yeah.
And I think this visual data is very specific in a way that we would need some guidelines also, and even technical help, how to handle this kind of big amount of pictures, how to publish pictures in a way that respects their nature.
Yeah, maybe I can add one more thing. Like another thing that I tried, like I mentioned in my presentation, is to provide like open tools how anonymization can become a bit easier for researchers, because we cannot expect everyone to be an expert in this topic. So like facilitating by providing tools and easy solutions to researchers.
I think open data streams is a kind of a good perhaps outro, if I'm not kind of confused with the timings here. Then I think we could all join in thanking Kamyar and Marika for the contribution, but also, of course, Charlotte was the person who recorded and edited the videos, and Essi made this happen. So with Charlotte, yes. So maybe we can all join hands in thanking this.